Welcome to PAREV-TV. We are once again very, very excited to share with you information and get to know an Armenian doctor. Her name is Sharon Anoush Chekijian. She has recently been awarded a Fulbright Scholar Award. This goes from the Yale University Department of Emergency Medicine. She will be working in Armenia. She is assigned to Armenia year 2020, 2022. And she will be stationed or teaching at the American University of Armenia. She'll be teaching emergency system and curriculum development at the university. This is very, very exciting. And Sharon, congratulations. Every single Armenian paper I checked had your biography and this good news, the Fulbright Scholar. So we're all excited for you. My first question is, we are going through this pandemic. How is the pandemic going to alter your plans going to Armenia? Are you still going to Armenia?
Oh, thanks for having me on, Vartan. I was awarded the Fulbright right at the beginning, actually, of the pandemic. The application had gone in about 6 months before COVID had started. And so I had applied actually to go this September and October. I have what's called a Flex Award, which as a clinician is important because I wouldn't be able to leave for 4 months or 6 months or a year at a time, as some academics are able to do, because I still obviously have to work in the hospital. And so this award allows me to go over 3 segments, 4 months over the next 2 years. And so right now the Fulbright is holding off on any travel until after January. And my hope is that by then we'll have a vaccine and I will be able to go. But we can talk more about this. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done. And so that work will be started here and virtually, like we've all been doing in all of our work.
So many plans have been disrupted because of the pandemic. Things have gone upside down. I'm sure you hear about French doctors, Armenian doctors from France going to Armenia to help out. What is your take of the whole situation? I also heard this morning that the AAHPO, the American Armenian Health Professional Organization of the tri-state area, are also mobilizing their troops to go to Armenia. What is your take of the very, very serious situation in Armenia?
Yeah, so the government was doing a wonderful job, and I should say the people of Armenia were doing a wonderful job of keeping the disease under control and under check. And in fact, they were sending every single positive patient to the hospital or to a hotel where they could be secluded. Obviously, at this point, we've surpassed those numbers. And so people are remaining in their community, which is different from the control measures that were in place before. And I think we're starting to see the ramifications of that. Armenia is a very interesting place, and like many places in the world, there are many multi-generational families. So in one apartment, you may have very small children, all the way up to grandparents and great-grandparents. And this is obviously very concerning because most young people who go out, even if they contract COVID, will be perfectly fine. In a situation like Armenia, where you have so many people living together and so many generations living together, those considerations are really very different. It looks very different, I think, within the family unit. You don't have 1 or 2 people in an apartment. You may have many, and many older people that are going to be exposed.
You speak about Armenia with so much knowledge. When I ask friends, I'm having an interview with Sharon Anoush Chekijian. So you come from a family that has been very involved in Armenian life, and you come from a very noble family, honestly. And when was the last time you went to Armenia, and what was your experience like?
We were there last June for the Armenian World Medical Congress.
Yeah.
And, we always love going. We try to go once or twice a year. And I think when I'm not there, I'm thinking about it. So you're right. It plays a big part in my life. And I'm sure everybody at work is tired of hearing me talk about Armenia.
What is emergency systems?
Yeah, so this is interesting. I think it's important to realize that emergency medicine really started in the 1950s in the States, and it had very humble beginnings. Really, it was taking place in the basements of hospitals or in spare rooms. And what happened was people were traveling by automobile, so we started having traffic crashes and injuries. We started to have all sorts of innovations. As you know, antibiotics were introduced in the 1950s. Interventions such as catheterization for heart attacks, stroke interventions, which are really undergoing a lot of changes even right now, all became sort of the purview of emergency medicine. And doctors who maybe didn't have too much to offer their patients in the 1950s, 1960s for acute conditions, suddenly found that there needed to be 24-hour care, and we really had a lot of interventions to address acute conditions. And this became the world of emergency medicine, with which I live in right now. And as you know, it has grown by leaps and bounds in the United States. But in most of the world, we still have that very rudimentary system of, a spare room, maybe staffed by somebody who's not trained in emergency medicine, and with no real support system behind them. In other words, no ambulances, no maybe 911 equivalent number. And so in Armenia, we actually have a few of those things which we can talk about. So we're at an advantage. But when you look at most of the world, emergency medical systems remain quite undeveloped.
How are the nurses in Armenia? What is the standard we go by in Armenia?
So nursing care in Armenia has evolved. I think that the education in nursing still has a lot of opportunities for improvement. And UCLA has done a lot of work with Erebuni Hospital in their nursing school, trying to instill, high standards, and also having nurses practice to the extent that their scope will allow. Obviously, they're not practicing as physicians, but there is a lot that they can do within the hospital and outside of the hospital to take care of patients that they weren't typically charged with in Armenia previously.
And what more specifically are the needs you think in Armenia? What do they need? Ambulances, nurses, doctors? What is the main need? And how can that
Um,
be supplied?
so, in terms of emergency medicine, let me just tell you a little bit about what it's like there right now. Emergency medicine can really be divided up into this Anglo-American model or Franco-German model. Anglo-American is what you're familiar with, where you have paramedics or medics that
Mm.
are on ambulances, maybe distributed throughout a city or a town, and they're dispatched whenever there is a call. And they work from protocols because they're not medical professionals with a degree. So they have to operate under certain restrictions and certain protocols. The Franco-German model, which is what Armenia has, actually has the benefit of having a physician who's on the ambulance. And so when a call goes to 103, which is the 911 equivalent number, a doctor, a nurse, and a driver will be dispatched to that spot. So you have huge advantages there because you have highly intelligent, trained people, physicians, and a nurse going out to the scene. And in Armenia, as opposed to in the States where almost everybody's transported to the hospital, in Armenia, only about 20 to 25% of patients are taken to the hospital. Most of the care is rendered on scene.
Mm.
Um, because they are trained professionals, they don't operate from protocol. So that's good and bad because they can think through a large differential diagnosis. They can apply whatever treatment they think is necessary. But on the other hand, there's less of that systemic thinking that we have when we think about ambulance care and out of hospital care, is what we call it in the States. When you compare what we have in Armenia compared to the protocol driven medicine that we have in the States, there are definitely opportunities for improvement there. The physicians that are on the ambulances, because emergency medicine does not exist, and that's the purpose of my project right now, doesn't exist to a large degree, the physicians that are staffing the ambulances have been trained in internal medicine, maybe surgery, cardiology. There are pediatricians, there are OBGYNs. And so they may be well versed in the emergent conditions within their specialty, but they don't have a comprehensive training or knowledge of emergency medicine and everything that that encompasses.
It's such an honor to talk to you. I really mean it because I'm thinking of your generation of your parents who lived with a dream of Armenia. After the genocide, we all know the stories. And their dreams came true 30 years ago with Armenia, that little space of territory. And now we have the finest and the brightest of American Armenians going to Armenia, trying to find ways of helping it. Where did you get that fire lit in you? I know it came from the family. And what can you tell the younger generation in terms of nurturing pride in Armenia that needs us all?
Okay. That's an interesting question. I actually just did a presentation for our residency program here at Yale on Global Health Day, and the subject was Armenia. And the different projects that I've done there. And I always joke that I'm a one country globalist, which is really true. I mean, I have been to Iraq, to Iran, to Uganda. I've worked on projects in those areas. But I always, my heart is really with Armenia. And I think there's just so much work to be done there. That I really want to concentrate my efforts there. I went to Armenia first in 1991 with the AGBU language program. It was still the Soviet Union at that time. And I went actually to learn Western Armenian with Kevork Bardakjan from University of Michigan, who I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
And we had a wonderful summer. We were there for the entire summer. I had very well-known people actually on my trip. Kim Hakimian, another public health specialist, was one of the participants, and many of my good friends, or people who became my good friends, were on that trip. And I think, we landed actually in Paris on the eve of the Soviet coup on the way back from Armenia. Mm-hmm. So when we left, it was a republic. When we landed, it was not.
That's fascinating story.
It was fascinating. And I think that really intrigued me. And I think from that point on, I watched the progress of that country, as we became an independent nation, as we prioritized what we wanted to work on, and as systems were built. And I think, one thing that I've noticed, and this is the impetus behind my project, is that medicine is lagging behind, and emergency medical systems in particular have really lagged behind. And as you know, Armenia, when people in Armenia are determined to do something, it gets done, and to a wonderful degree and an incredible result. Think about all the touristic sites, endeavors, hotels, cafes, restaurants. In many ways, it's more pleasant than life at home. But when you think about the hospitals and what people have in terms of resources and for healthcare, there's a huge disparity between the industries and the development within those industries.
I'm going to bring up a very interesting documentary you co-produced, I think, The Hidden Map. I read about it. I knew nothing about it. But the reason I'm bringing this up, because when Anya Ovanesyan was filming that, I must have been at the same site with her. I was in Dikranaget with the gentleman, Stephen, the Scottish guy. So tell us about that experience, and why did you produce it? Why did you
sure.
This?
So you'd have to have Ani on to talk about all this, because she's done so much work on the film since we first started. But I had the opportunity to travel with Ani several times, actually, in the years, I'm thinking 2011, 2012, 2013, with both of our fathers, and with Nasser and the trip that Nasser had organized. So with quite a large group. And we went through all of historic Armenia. And on the third trip, I think it was, we met Steve Sim. And he got onto our minibus, and Armin Aroyan said, I want to introduce you to Steve. And I think in a way I was a person in search of a documentary subject for a lot of my life. And Ani, as you know, is a filmmaker and concentrates on documentary films. And we met Steve, and he's a fascinating person. I mean, he is a man who began as an architect, and his story, this is very far away from emergency medicine, isn't it?
Yes, but it's interesting.
His story is that when he was in architecture school, they were all required to do a sort of grand tour of Europe. And Steve, being Scottish, had tight purse strings. And so he looked for the cheapest flight, from what I remember him telling us, and he bought a flight to Turkey. And he also went to the secondhand bookstore, and he was looking for a cheap history book on Turkey. And he found the second volume of, I think it's Robert's travel book from 1920 something, 23 or 28. I don't want to misrepresent it. But only the second volume was available, and it is an out of print and rare book. So he bought the second volume, and the second volume was all about Western Armenia, historic Armenia. So Steve, having no idea about the politics of the area or that the genocide had occurred, started to read about these fantastic places, and he was really looking forward to traveling to Ani in particular,
Yes,
and seeing this lost city, on the frontier. And at the time that he traveled, which I think was in the early 1970s, if I'm correct, Ani was still in no man's land, so it wasn't open to the public. So when he arrived, he requested permission to go into Ani, and he stayed in Kars. And that request was unanswered for maybe 5 days or a week. And he was staying in the hotel, and he decided to go to Khuzkunk to see what that looked like. And he had his book, and he read about it. He said, okay, it's a complex of multiple churches, and he hiked to Khuzkunk. And when he arrived there, he couldn't find anything that looked like what was in the history book or in that travel book. So he took pictures. He said, this must be the site, but I don't know what happened to it. And he walked back to the village, and he asked the governor or the mayor, what happened? And they said, why are you interested? And, he tried to explain himself, and I think he ended up in jail that night. And he finally was able to get out and to go to Ani. And I think that really sparked his lifelong interest with that region, because he was really the only explorer in that area for many years, because Armenians from that region, obviously, after the genocide, did not want to travel back, were afraid to travel back, and it really wasn't an area of much interest to many people. So as a result, Steve, over the years, had collected longitudinally photos of Ani, and then he expanded his search to other sites, and he has a fascinating process that he goes through of locating where he thinks a monastery might be on Google Maps, and kind of zoning in on that. And then little by little getting, he goes the roundabout way. He's learned his lesson. He doesn't go through the villages anymore, but he hikes to those areas, and he documents this very slow and torturous destruction of Armenian monuments, or what we call the White Genocide.
Անուշ, իսկապես անուշ ես, և խոսքդ և միտքդ բայցար է, ինչպես կիրես խոսեցանք շաբթու ընթացքին և ասինք վերջավորությամբ քեզի հայերեն պիտի խոսցնել դամ։ Այնպես որ փակման խոսքը ինչ է քու հայու հոգիդ ինչպես կնաս փոխանցել մեր ժողովրդին որ պիտի ունգընտրեն։ Այդքան հբարդ են քեզ մով անգերզս եմ, պիտի ուզեին քոնը հայերենով փակել, որտև գտնանք ժամերով խոսի։
Շնորհակալություն Բարթան եւ շնորհակալություն այդ հնարավորություն համար։ Իմ կարծիքով, երբ որ կմտածեմ Հայաստանի մասին, կմտածեմ, որ շատ գործ ունենք անելու եւ այդ գործը պետք է անենք միասին։ Ուրեմն ես կհրավիրեմ ով որ կուզենա մեզի օգնել առաջ գնալ եւ այնպես որ պիտի կոչենք ուրեմն մեր
You told me there is the problem with Eastern Armenian, Western Armenian, but you're really doing a good job with the Eastern Armenian, which I cannot do. Abris, շնորհակալ ենք ձեր խոսքերուն, ձեր աշխատանքին, հաջողություն կմաղթենք, ուրիշ ոչինչ, եւ բարի օր։
Շնորհակալություն, բարի օր ձեզի։